come to feel that shooting the HD and stills together in an environment like a wedding really should have a couple of shooters on it. But when you're talking about senior portraiture, it's really something that a one-man or one-gal band can do. Hi, I'm Bruce Dorn. I'm going to talk a little bit about shooting senior portraiture with the HD cameras, the new HD hybrid cameras. I'm not necessarily pushing the wedding capture so much with the HD functionality these days as I am asking people to take a look at senior photography. I've had really good luck with it. Not so much of an in-the-trenches kind of a shooter these days, more of a guy who shoots stuff of my own interest. But in that process, I've been doing some senior style shooting with HD as well as stills. And interesting little anecdote I can share with you is that I did a shoot with a young lady who's a rodeo rider. She's in youth rodeo, and so I essentially did the equivalent of a senior portrait session with her and her boyfriend with stills, and then went ahead and expanded it into an HD portrait as well. Ended up with about a 6-minute piece that was pretty interesting. Holly is a barrel racer, and she rides pole bending, which is sometimes called gymkhana. And Holly's got a great look, 17-year-old blonde, very athletic. Once I did the finished piece, in which I did include her parents, it occurred to me to include some interviews with her parents as to sort of who she was at that point in time. Family really liked it. They ended up posting it to all their friends, and somehow through the magic of the internet it ended up being seen by a couple of casting directors. Holly was offered an opportunity to read for the lead in the remake of True Grit, the old John Wayne movie that's being remade right now for contemporary times, starring I think Jeff Bridges and Matt Damon and maybe Josh Brolin. Holly couldn't quite pull off the colloquial 1890s accent that the lead character required, but she got to read for the lead of a feature film, An Absolute Unknown. And it's pretty much attributable to the fact that she had an HD portrait. Since that time, she's also been offered opportunities to work with Jon Favreau in Cowboys and Aliens, a feature film that's being shot in New Mexico. I think she might be doing some stunt writing on that. So, interesting thing to consider. How often does one's senior portrait session end up with the potential of a couple of movie deals? Pretty cool thing. Now, I've come to feel that shooting the HD and stills together in an environment like a wedding really should have a couple of shooters on it. But when you're talking about senior portraiture, it's really something that a one-man or one-gal band can do. And I think that little story says a lot in terms of how much the internet reaches out and how much motion contributes to image capture. So do yourself a favor, investigate HD capture as one of your product offerings, and you might end up with some clients who are extremely happy. Also, remember to include the parents or the siblings. It can be a pretty cool family portrait if you think of it that way. And, frankly, all the rodeo families that have seen this, if I was actively pursuing their business, I would have clients standing 20 deep. So check it out. Remember, the dinosaurs didn't evolve, and look what happened to them. Anytime I meet a client, it's all about learning who they are and how best to represent who they are. So I think it's actually a disservice to try to fit my clients into a preconceived notion of my approach to photography. So a lot of my work looks very different. I can't say I ever do the same thing twice. It does make marketing a little bit more of a challenge. You know, you often get a client that comes in and goes, "Oh, I love that shot, do it exactly the same way for my family and my kids." But I always tell them, no, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to learn who the kids are, learn what their personality is like, and I'm going to design the shoot around that. Now, I have an advantage in that I'm at a kind of a higher price point, and I have clients that understand that I work a certain way. So even though they might want a certain thing that I've done, my goal is to continue to explore and discover new stuff. So they kind of got to come along for the ride. So workflow wise, yeah, on the post-processing side, there are certain things that I do often the same way, but I try to strive always to not have a preconceived notion and a formulated approach. So audio is, of course, an important component to capture, and I'm a big fan of the folks at Triple Scoop Music. Once I've met my client and have an understanding of who they are and what their unique characteristic is, then I go looking for the music. Now that, in effect, forms a foundation or an underpinning. When I'm on location shooting with a client, I always make sure that I get wild track. Might be at a rodeo arena, might be at a motorcycle gathering, just any unique circumstances, of course, going to have unique audio components as well. So I always make sure that I record some wild track. And then I don't depend on the camera's in-camera capture for the audio. I use an independent recorder. I use these days a Tascam DR100. The Zoom H4n is another good one. They're both about 300 bucks. I don't get worried about a lot of external mics and mixers and all that kind of stuff. If I can get one of my small independent standalone recorders just out of frame during interview sequences, I can adjust the levels and then I'll let it roll. I tend to let the camera roll its audio with the idea that I will use it as a guide track, and then I replace the audio with the better component from the external recorder. People will forgive a lot of stuff in photography and call it technique. A lot of mistakes in photography you can call technique, but in audio, if the audio doesn't sound good, people are merciless. So a lot of us, are well skilled at visual capture, and a lot of the aspects of still capture relate to motion capture. Audio is a fairly new thing for us, so it's something I suggest that you spend a fair amount of time experimenting on. Never, never, never go into a job presenting yourself as a professional until you have professional level skills. So practice is the new black. Get out there and practice. Spend some time on audio without your camera so that you know how to work with it comfortably, so that you're instinctive and intuitive with your audio components just like you are with your camera. Always place a big emphasis on the audio part of it and you'll do fine.
My name's Holly. I'm from St. John's, Arizona. I've been rodeoing for all my life, and I love it. It's my favorite thing to do ever.
Yeah, interviews are an important component, but I like to catch the subject in sort of unguarded moments. So I make sure that I do a lot of shooting before I get to the interview process, because a lot of people are self-conscious about speaking to the camera. There's a couple of ways that you can do it. You can be an off-camera interviewer, and you can be off to the side and you can interview somebody so they're talking face-to-face with you. The camera is off axis to one side or the other, and some people are more comfortable with that kind of approach. I like the direct contact, so what I do quite often when I'm doing an interview is I get the camera prepped and rolling before I let them know that I am actually rolling. I spend a lot of time monkeying around with the camera so I can get to know the person while I'm seemingly busy with technique. I get my technique done in a matter of seconds, and I can be rolling almost instantly, but I fool them into thinking that we're not quite shooting and we're just conversing. And if I do that while I'm behind the camera, essentially right behind the camera, paying attention to the menus, but I'm talking to them from behind the camera, then pretty soon they're looking directly into the camera and conversing with me unself-consciously. It's a nice little trick, but if you watch like network interviews, you're going to find the two techniques: directly into camera and off-axis to an off-axis interviewer who's asking questions and initiating a dialogue. So try them both. But direct eye contact is really fantastic, and that means looking down the barrel of the lens. So it's going to be another skill you have to master. Yeah. Important too to understand that shutter speeds play a different role in HD capture than they do in still capture. You want to stick with shutter speeds that are roughly twice your frame rate. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, settle on 1/50th of a second as your shutter speed. If you're shooting at 30 frames per second, settle at 1/60th of a second as your baseline shutter speed. Now you can rove up about a stop's worth above that, but if you get higher it starts to look like video. If you want the cinematic look, if you want your footage to look like a movie, a motion picture capture, do what the movie cameras do and use the equivalent of 180-degree shutter, which means shutter speed twice your frame rate. It'll make your pictures that much more interesting.